Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Justin here, just in for another nearly unbelievable story of video game lore. Now, let me take you back to 1988. I was 10. Some of you were -5 years old at the time. But around this time, Sega was planning on releasing another video game home console. Another one. Yes, some people may know about the Sega Master System, but there was one even further back released in 1983 only in Japan, which the most popular version was called the Mark III, so you may have heard of that. But 16-bit, Sega was going to be one of the first. NEC had the PC Engine about the same time. Not technically a 16-bit system, but back then all those kind of numbers really mattered. However, Sega wanted to get a foothold in the US, and they knew that sports was very important. They already had a packing game that was Altered Beast, a nearly arcade perfect port of one of their action games. A decent showcase of the system's capabilities. Maybe not the most fun game ever, but it was a good pack-in. And they knew they wanted to get in with America, and what they needed to do was make sports games. We Americans, we like our sports. So they signed some license deals with some big players in all three of the major sports. They signed Tommy Lasorda for baseball, a famous baseball manager, and also nutrition-esque shake consumer from commercials in my youth. They signed Pat Riley, the fashionable basketball head coach, and even bigger than all those, they signed somebody who was relevant. They signed Joe Montana, the world-famous quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, Super Bowl champion, legendary player. But they had a problem. They didn't actually have a game to put Joe Montana on the cover of. They were working on games, but football, much like pro wrestling games, you need a passion, you need a knowledge, you need, a base to build off of to make a game, especially in a short amount of time if you want to hit that launch window. Now, around that same time, Sega was trying to get third-party licenses. Now, if you don't know what that is, a third-party license, a third-party manufacturer is somebody making games for your system who is not you. For example, Capcom, Konami, Acclaim, those were all companies that were making third-party games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, Nintendo had the market cornered, and they also had third parties in kind of an iron grip. They used to say, if you're making games for us, you only make games for us. Not for Sega, not for who else. I mean, they had the market cornered already, but they wanted to keep it that way. But Electronic Arts was making games on PC. They made John Madden Football, the original, back in 1988. And this was so realistic because John Madden, who was a legendary coach himself, wouldn't have any 5-on-5, 6-on-6. He wanted full teams on the field playing against one another. And they made it happen, and it was a great game. And EA was getting ready to make a Genesis version of that game. And man, looking back at it now, so Super Mario Kart gets a lot of love for being Mode 7. But I think that Madden's scrolling on the field of the numbers and the lines is really underrated. I mean, that was a really cool thing, and they were going to have that on Genesis. They already had it. It worked out. They had it pretty much finished, and they submitted it to Sega, and Sega's like, we love this. This is great. But would you do us a solid? Would you make another football game for us, for Joe Montana? And Trip Hawkins, who is the founder of EA, was like, you got to be kidding, right? You want us to make our competition? Sega said, well, yes, we do. We'll make it worth your while. We got a very limited amount of time. Just take Madden and change it around a little bit so people won't notice. I mean, football is football, right? Tripp thought about it, talked to his guys, said, okay, let's do it. So EA and the makers of John Madden Football also made the first Joe Montana Football for Sega Genesis. And it was a decent game. I mean, it played well and maybe didn't look as good, maybe didn't have the bells and whistles that John Madden did, but it worked. It was a good game. I remember renting it. I liked it. Me and Austin Aries used to rent pretty much every sports game there was. Football was, fun to play together against each other. So really what ended up happening is Trip Hawkins and EA made two of the best-selling games of the Genesis launch window because, man, Joe Montana sold great, and of course John Madden sold great as a revolutionary game. And so they got that money from Sega. They got the sales, the cut of the sales, and had their John Madden stuff on top of it. And, they were doing really well. What a great foundation for EA, of course, to form it started as EASN, Electronic Arts Sports Network, but ESPN thought that was a little too close, so they went to EA Sports, and you all remember EA Sports. It's in the game. And, they went on to kind of rule the 16-bit era, made Super Nintendo games as well. Now, this would be the only Joe Montana that EA would make, of course. The following year, they would make, Sega would come out with Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football, which was a completely different game to the point where the perspective actually changed on the gameplay. It had this really cool zoom-in feature. It had a very chatty, AI-driven commentator. It was a very cool game. I mean, very unique, and it didn't kick off a brand like they hoped. There was a Sports Talk Baseball that, by that time, kind of most of the baseball games had a decent commentary mechanic in place already. But it was definitely a great game, and it was developed by Blue Sky Software, which went on to make games like Vector Man. So they became, I think they did at least one of the X-Men games, Shadowrun. They kind of became a favorite on Sega Genesis, so good for them. Now, Trip Hawkins, who again was one of Electronic Arts' founders, went on to form a company called 3DO. Now, some of you may not know what 3DO was. Before PlayStation came out and did disc-based console games right, Sega had the Saturn II. 3DO was kind of the kind of kid in the corner picking its nose of the 32-bit console systems, but they actually had some Madden, and they had FIFA, which of course was a big international get as well, and that's because, of course, Trip was now doing 3DO, and he started EA, so he was able to they had a Road Rash for 3DO. They had some big heavy hitters from EA, but it wasn't enough. System going in part because it was so damn expensive. I mean, we're talking like, I think at one point $700 for a unit. Panasonic and Gold Star were both making their own version of the same console. They kind of licensed out the manufacturing to other hardware manufacturers, which was really weird and was really never done again, and for good reason, because it failed with 3DO. But I thought that was fascinating that the makers of John Madden also made Joe Montana for the first year on Sega Genesis. I hope that this was an interesting little trivia nugget about video games that you found fascinating. Of course, if you're unfamiliar with me, I made a bunch of wrestling video games, and I have a playlist of me playing through all of them with director's commentary. So these kind of insightful things, but from my firsthand perspective. But hey, either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my videos again. Bye.
Thanks for watching, and please like this video, and please subscribe, and have a lovely day.